Hi guys, we're going to do a tutorial for our DIY Valentine's Day cookie kit. Most of the supplies needed are inside the cookie kit sold from Frosted Bake Shop. The 4 uniced cookies, a decorating scribe, your 4 hybrid icing colors, mauve, red, brown, and white, and then a thicker white detail icing. There are also some additional supplies used in the tutorial video that will be helpful. Damp paper towels are a must. Edible food markers purchased at pretty much any baking supply store. Turntable, that's totally optional. Additional tipless decorating bags and powdered sugar. That's if you'd like to make some more colors in the thicker detail icing. All right, let's get started. These are our 4 finished cookies, and we're going to be beginning with the gnome cookie. And as we go through the video, you will see we're going to do sections, kind of a color by number. And we're going to do a part of one cookie, set it aside, and then do the same color in a different cookie. And we're going to work like that. So starting with the gnome cookie, you're going to get your edible food marker if you got one. And we're going to trace out or just freehand the sections that we're going to flood in different colors. So you've got the bottom of the toadstool, the top, the gnome's beard, the little letter, and then his hat, and kind of where it flops over, we're going to make a crease there. If you didn't pick up some of that edible food markers, then you can always just use your detail icing or just the color you're flooding in to section that off. So you're going to cut just a tiny bit of the white hybrid tip off the tipless piping bag. You want to start small, and you can always cut a little bit more off, but you can't go back. So if you do happen to cut too much, you're going to want to rebag that. And you're going to first trace around with your hybrid icing, and then you're going to flood inside. Now, tracing around, making a barrier line helps prevent the icing from flooding over the side or going into the other sections. And it helps if you have consistent pressure and you kind of pull up, as you can see when you're outlining. Just pull up on the bag away from the cookie and let it kind of drape down. You have a lot more control that way and less breakage too. And then you're going to flood inside. So to flood, you're just going to add more pressure as you're pressing the bag. Flooding is, there's no really rhyme or reason. You can do any way you want. Some people do kind of outside and then fill in towards the center. You can do zigzag. It doesn't really matter. Just get the icing everywhere and then use your scribe to help it along. All right, next we're going to do the white portion of our letter with the heart stamp. And we are going to do the same thing we just did. We are going to do the opposite sections of the letter. And you want to do the opposite sections so that they have time to set before you do the parts that are going to touch each other. So you can start with either the top or the bottom, or as I'm doing here, the sides. And you're just going to create that barrier and then go in and fill it in however you want to do it. Use your scribe while it's still wet to help get the icing to go where you want it to go. Once the icing sets after maybe like 2 minutes, any mark you make with the scribe is going to probably show in the finished product when it's dry. So you want to make sure to use your scribe to get it to go where you want and get any air bubbles and imperfections out while the icing is still wet. If you do happen to let it set too long and you nick it or something, a good trick is to dip your scribe in water and then try to get rid of that imperfection, and the water will help loosen all the icing around it so that it blends a little bit better. Doing the same thing with the other side. We're going to go in later and add some details. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect, but the letter is nice because it already kind of has the lines from the cookie cutter. And once we go in with the other sections, they will touch, but you'll see the crease since we're going to let it set first. Next, we're going to do the hot air balloon. We're going to do the same thing we did with the gnome and use an edible food marker to trace out the sections of the hot air balloon where the different colors are going to go. I like to use a light color because if I mess up, I can just do a different line and it won't be so hard to see. So I go over light first and then kind of go over again if I need to, a little bit darker with the same color. And then also, if you're doing any white, you really want to use a light food marker because the food marker can bleed into the frosting on top if it's a light color like white or really light pink. So using a lighter color to trace is good. And then we're going to start with the pink sections, the mauve color of the hot air balloon. So we're going to start by outlining every other section for the mauve. And as you can see, once I do that, I'm going to add a line to the center. This line that I add to the center, the line of frosting, is actually to help it from cratering. When you do a long and narrow section, or really any narrow section, you can easily have cratering, and you won't notice this until it's too late. So it's too late to fix it. Once it's dry, you'll often wake up in the morning and see that it's cratered in the middle. So adding that gives it some support underneath that middle section. So this is really important tip. Just add a little bit in the middle. And then help your scribe along. And then we're going to fill in those sections with the mauve. And when we flood, we're adding more pressure, especially because we want it to kind of bubble up and give it a nice puffy look since it's a balloon. So you're going to want to press a lot with your hybrid icing to give it that look. So we're going to set that aside for a second and work on the gnome's hat. The gnome's hat, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to trace around our outline that we did with our edible marker with the hybrid icing. Now I want that to not bleed where I created that little flop over of his hat. So I'm going to set it aside just so it has time to set for a second before I go in and flood. So we're going to set this cookie aside and go back to our hot air balloon and fill in those mauve parts. It just adds a lot of pressure, consistent, get it to where you feel like it's pretty much covered, and then use your scribe to even it out, get all the icing where you need it to go. This is a little bit thicker of a hybrid too, so it gives you more time to work with it. The white is a little bit thinner. You can always thicken up your icing as well with adding a little bit of powdered sugar. So powdered sugar will thicken it and water will thin it. So if you feel like it's not the right consistency for you, you can always pour it in a bag, stir in a little powdered sugar till it's really smooth, and then rebag it. Also, when you're working with a cookie kit that's been prepackaged, you want to make sure you're massaging your frosting bags so that any separation that happened, natural separation, doesn't affect your cookie texture. So you want to make sure that you give it a really good massage to incorporate all of the water back into the frosting. I use the scribe and get all of those air bubbles out. And then we'll let this dry for a while before we're going to go in with the red in between. If I was to do it right away, it would bleed into each other, which is definitely a technique that we use. We don't want it on this though, because we want the individual sections to be noticeable. But you could definitely go in with the red right now and it would just create a very smooth surface. All right, that's pretty good. You can tap it, tap the cookie, and that helps getting the air bubbles or imperfections out as well. All right, now we're going to work on our heart. This is a really basic one. We're just going to flood the cookie. So outline the shape with your hybrid mauve. You could use other color too, any other color that you want that you have. And then flood inside. And I used an edible black food marker, or maybe I used dark brown. But you can use an edible food marker to do little polka dots, or you can use one of your other icing colors to add little polka dots or anything else you'd like to add to the cookie. This one's really a great one for practicing different techniques because it's just very basic, but it can be jazzed up. And just get all that icing smoothed out. And if you notice the scribe, I'm really using it up and down. I'm not holding it down like you would a pencil. You're really holding it upright because you want that sharp part of the scribe to make the most contact and not have the side of the scribe touching your icing. Tap, tap, tap. You can really tell the tapping helps a lot. And then you don't even have to touch your cookie. If you have a turntable or something that it's sitting on, you can just tap that. All right, we're going to let this sit for a while since I'm going to use the edible food marker. So I want that to sit, and we're going to fill in this section of the hats, the hat on the gnome. Since I let it set for a bit before I flooded, that part where it swapped over will have some definition because that line is going to be firmer than the rest of the icing around it. It's been drying, so it's going to retain its shape and kind of keep that little flop. And then while it's still wet, we're going to immediately go in and add these stripes with the white hybrid. The stripes are super cute, and since we're doing a wet on wet technique, that's what it's called when you leave your wet icing and you add another color on top. It basically sits into the under icing and it's going to be a smooth finish. So it looks like it's the fabric. It's not like an additional detail on top. Just use your scribe to make sure it's sitting nicely. The lines are straight. All right, now that this has time to set on the two side sections of the letter, we're going to go in and do the top and bottom. So same exact thing you did with the sides. You'll just outline the shape with your hybrid white, and then you're going to just fill in with the flood. Same icing. We're not even cutting the tip to flood, we're just adding more pressure. You can tell a lot more icing comes out when you squeeze harder. The tipless piping bags are, if you get a good brand, and there's lots of good brands, there's very few brands that I've had that have been not good. They don't burst, so if you're going to squeeze it hard, it's not going to pop. They're pretty durable. And use your scribe, get those sections to touch. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, we're going to go over it with a detail white to add the details to the creases, but you just want at least them to touch. You don't have any naked areas. All right, looking pretty good. Tap, tap. All right, we are done with this cookie for now. We're going to do the red once those have had time to set. We're going to go back to our hot air balloon. The pink, as you can see, is a little bit less wet looking, less shiny. It's getting more of a matte texture of film on top, and that's how you know it's set long enough where you can go in with the next section. So you're going to fill in with the red, the same thing we did. We don't need to outline because we already have a natural outline with the pink. We're just going to add those center icing lines to help keep it from cratering in the middle. And then we're going to flood with the red. Now I purposely did the red and mauve thicker of a hybrid than the white because I really want these puffy areas to show up and look puffy. And so the thicker the hybrid icing, the more it's going to puff up and not flatten out. So if you need to rebag, add a little powdered sugar and then rebag. If you want it thicker, you can do that. But what comes in the kit should already be pretty thick of a hybrid. Now there's three basic types of icing consistency. One is the flood, that's thinnest, and then there's really thin flood, and then there's all kinds of 5-second flood, 10-second flood. But basically, a flood is anything that will spread on its own. If you weren't to help it with a scribe, it's going to settle into the areas inside that outline, and it's going to do that pretty much on its own without much help. The next is a hybrid, which is this red that I'm using now. And it can be used to do details, and it can be used to flood. It's just going to take more work to flood, so you're going to have to use your scribe a lot more to get it to flood. But the hybrid is the most useful consistency because it can be used for either details or flooding. And it gives you a lot more control since you have more time before it spreads. The next is detail icing, which is much thicker, and we have white in the kit for our details after, like the letter on the gnome and the letter with the heart stamp, and the flags on the hot air balloon. And that's a much thicker icing. So basically, it doesn't move at all. Wherever you put it, it retains that shape. And then there's an even thicker one that you might use for flowers and things, and that's also a detail, but sometimes detail can also have consistency differences. So for something like a flower, which is going to be a lot of icing that you want to retain its shape and maybe even go upward like 3D, that needs to be super thick. And so we're going to just get all this icing. And if you feel like you didn't like the original lines, you can really help move the lines with your scribe underneath the icing just by kind of forcing the icing to push up against the other color side. So if you're OCD like me and you don't like the way it looks perfectly, you can kind of help it along a little bit. All right, that looks pretty good for now. We are going to go in and do the red on our toadstool now. So outline, you can leave a little space for the shoes of the gnome if you want. You don't have to because you can do the shoes right on top once the bottom areas have dried long enough. But I like to leave a little spot because I want to really bubble up those shoes and I want a spot underneath to kind of flood into. So I'm just kind of eyeing where I want my shoes to go and adding a little bit of a space for those. And then you're going to come in and flood. And once we've flooded, we're going to do a wet on wet technique with the white to give it those iconic toadstool white spots on the mushroom. And that's just going to be with our white hybrid icing. And if you want the spots to be bigger, just squeeze a little longer, and little spots, you can just do a quick dot. With circles in general, you don't move your bag, you just squeeze longer. So get your scribe to get all of the red nice and settled, and then we'll go in with those white dots. I always like to give a little tap at the end. You don't want air bubbles. Air bubbles are not your friend. All right, looks pretty good. Get out the white. And as you can see, I don't move the bag. I'm not doing a circular motion with the bag. I'm just squeezing and letting the icing flood outward. So more pressure and longer in one spot is going to make a bigger circle. And then you can use your scribe just to make sure that there's no peaks in the middle. Sometimes when you do a circle, there'll be a little peak, especially if it's thicker icing. Use your scribe to make sure there's none of that. All right, now we're going to go into the middle section of the letter. Since all the sections you can tell are very matte, they've dried long enough where it's not going to bleed. Especially with white, you want to make sure that those sections are pretty dry. So maybe setting it aside for 10 or 15 minutes and then going in with the red. Since the red is thicker, it's not going to probably bleed anyways, but I added an outline to it just to make sure it stays in that area and doesn't bleed into the white. Also, A tip, if you're going to make your own icing, adding white food coloring to the base of any food coloring or any icing before you add color will help prevent color bleed. So even with the red icing, I started with white icing. I added white to my already white, naturally colored icing, and then I add red. It gives it a base color. All right, we'll add our lines for our letter, the letter flap, and then we're going to go in and do the bottom section. Now I'm doing the bottom section before the top section. You could do the other way around. However, you always want the background to be done first because it will look like the flap is on top if you do that after, which you want. So it gives it more of a three-dimensional realistic look. All right, we're going to do the basket. Now I'm going to go in and outline the top and the bottom of the basket, but I'm first going to just flood the bottom. I want a little separation, just like we did with the gnome hat. So I want to see that those are two distinct sections. And of course I have the line to prevent the cratering. So we'll set this aside for a bit to kind of set before I go in and fill in that top section of the basket in brown. And at this point, you could also add your little brown lines holding the basket to the balloon if you want. All right, let's add the rest to the gnome. We're going to do the nose and the letter flap and the shoes. And just like with the toadstool dots, you're just going to squeeze in one spot. You're not going to move the piping bag for the nose and the shoes. Just squeeze quite a bit in one spot to give it a nice puffy nose and shoes. And then the letter flap. Now I'm using, I think, the detail, and you could use the detail or the flood for the letter flap. I just wanted it to dry quicker so I could put the little heart on there. And since it was a small area, I wasn't too concerned about having to work really hard to get the detail to settle in. As you can tell, it does take a lot more work though. And then we'll go ahead and do the shoes. And that's for those two little areas I had left for the shoes will come into play. So let's outline the letter and the detail, white. And then we'll add the little heart and the shoes. Now the heart is just a V, and then you can use your scribe to kind of puff out the top parts of the heart. So brown shoes, pressing and holding till it's the amount you want. So cute. Love gnomes. You don't have to do faces. So it makes it super easy for beginners. And then our heart, just making a V. Use your scribe. And that little guy is done. The cookie's all finished. All right, let's finish the letter by adding our detail white and our detail red. Now the detail red is really just the hybrid red, but we're adding the details in it. So, all right, we're just going to trace over each section where the lines meet. If you mess up, you can use your scribe to scrape it away or your finger. Since the white is pretty dry now, you won't smudge or dent the bottom if you're careful. And same thing with the outside. Sometimes the icing might break, and if it doesn't bother you, you can just continue on. But if you really want that nice line, as you'll see, I break it and I just fix it. I just take it off and do a new line. No big deal. Especially when it's the same color, you won't notice. All right, and then we're going to do the same thing with the red heart. We're going to add that outline to make it really pop. You could also put like love in red on top. That would be really cute. monochromatic heart if you did the lettering in red. Really give it that embossed look. And I'm going to go over this one more time just to really give it definition in the red. If this were detail red that I was using to outline it, doing two passes with it would definitely show. You're going to see because it won't blend together. But since this is a hybrid, it's just going to make a thicker line. And that cookie is now done as well. You can set that aside. We're going to finish our hot air balloon. Now, I didn't record my outlining the top, unfortunately, but I just went over with the mauve hybrid and just outlined each section in the top of the balloon. And then I went in and filled in the top of the basket with the brown hybrid. I added the little heart, and now we're going to add with the white detail, we're going to add the flag banner. You could do this in red as well, but there's purposely white detail in there for this, so it makes it really easy already. It's in there in your kit. Some triangles, space them out as you'd like, and then fill them in. Again, it's a small section, so you don't need to worry about using your hybrid and it flooding and ruining your cookie. So just use the detail and use your scribe to smooth it out. Again, if you want to dip your scribe in water, that helps loosen the frosting, icing, and making it a little bit thinner in those sections. But it doesn't really take much work since it's such a small area to use your scribe in the detail. And then this cookie is also done. You could add the word love to each of those flags if you'd like, or little hearts on the flags after it's dried a bit. You could just keep going and adding more and more details. All right, let's finish our heart. I'm just gonna add some polka dots with my black food marker. And then that's done. Your set is completely done now. How cute are these? Happy Valentine's Day, everybody.